From the moment you took your first breath, the world began shaping you into something it could understand. You were told to be polite, to sit still, to follow the rules, and to please others, as if goodness were a set of instructions rather than an expression of your true being. Alan Watts would argue that society's version of good often has very little to do with authenticity. Instead of encouraging you to bloom into who you naturally are, the world teaches you to become what makes everyone else comfortable. Somewhere along the way, your wildness was tamed, your creativity conditioned, and your truth whispered into silence. In childhood, you didn't worry about fitting in. You simply were. Your joy was instinctual, your curiosity endless, and your imagination unfiltered. But growing up meant learning to trade freedom for approval. Teachers praised you for compliance, not curiosity. Parents rewarded quiet behavior, not honest expression. Watts' philosophy reveals that this conditioning creates a mask, a persona designed to survive the expectations of others. Slowly, the soul becomes buried under layers of should, must, and ought to, until the person staring back in a mirror feels like a stranger. As you try to be good, you learn to shrink yourself. You apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for wanting more. You dimmed your light so others wouldn't complain it was too bright. Watts' teachings remind us that this is the greatest tragedy, to forget the divine spark within because the world preferred you dim. Goodness became confusion. You mistook self-betrayal for kindness and silence for peace. But real peace never requires your disappearance, only your truth. Then comes adulthood, where exhaustion becomes evidence that your mask has grown too heavy. You wake up one day, feeling disconnected, empty, unsure of who you even are. This is not failure, it is awakening. Watts would say that your true self cannot be destroyed, only ignored. It waits patiently beneath the roles you play, whispering reminders through dissatisfaction and quiet longing. That restlessness you feel is your soul telling you, you've wandered too far from home. And now, as you stand at this crossroads, something stirs within you, a spark, a memory, a voice you nearly forgot. What if being good was never about obedience, but about authenticity? What if the greatest act of goodness is refusing to betray yourself? The world taught you how to conform, but life is inviting you to remember, not who they wanted, but who you truly are. They never told you directly, but every raised eyebrow, every disappointed sigh, every subtle nod taught you the same lesson. Be who they expect, not who you are. Alan Watts believed that the greatest illusion humanity suffers is the belief that we must become something other than ourselves. Slowly, without realizing it, you began to construct a mask, a carefully curated version of you that pleased others. It spoke softly, avoided conflict, and carried the weight of everyone's expectations. But the more you perfected this mask, the more distant your true self became, hidden beneath layers of performance. You learned early that honest feelings made people uncomfortable, so you swallowed them instead. Tears were seen as weakness, anger as disrespect, and boldness as arrogance. Watts taught that society fears authenticity because authenticity disrupts control. It cannot be predicted or manipulated. So you learned to smile when you were hurting, laugh when you were anxious, and say, "I'm fine," when your soul was cracking. You became fluent in emotional camouflage, mistaking invisibility for safety. At first, wearing the mask felt harmless, even rewarding. People approved of you. Teachers praised you. You received smiles, applause, acceptance. But over time, something began to ache. You noticed your voice shaking when you tried to speak your truth. Dreams that once filled your body with light now felt distant. That discomfort wasn't weakness. It was your true self knocking from the inside, begging for air. Watts would say that the universe never stops calling you back to your nature, no matter how far you drift. The deepest tragedy is that you started believing the mask was you. You forgot the fire you once carried. You forgot the child who ran wildly, asked endless questions, and refused to shrink. The longer the mask stayed on, the heavier it became. Not everyone makes it to this realization. Many live entire lives inside the persona others built for them. But you began to sense a fracture, a whisper from the soul reminding you that your authenticity didn't disappear. It merely waited. And that whisper becomes louder the more you ignore it. Restlessness grows. Exhaustion becomes constant. You may not have known the cause, but the symptoms are clear. The mask you were trained to wear has become too heavy to hold. What's believed that suffering is the natural consequence of resisting who you truly are. The universe will keep shaking the shoulders of your soul until you remember your face beneath the costume. Losing yourself doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual surrender, one unspoken compromise at a time. You stop sharing your opinions to avoid disagreement. You abandon your passions for more acceptable careers. You chose relationships that demanded silence rather than truth. Alan Watts often warned that when we confuse approval with love, we sacrifice ourselves for acceptance. And so, you traded authenticity for belonging, not realizing that belonging without authenticity is loneliness in disguise. You began listening more to the voices outside your body than the voice within. Parents wanted stability, so you abandoned dreams. Friends valued popularity, so you chased appearances. Culture defined success, so you obeyed. What's taught that identity formed from comparison is not identity. It is imitation. And imitation, no matter how well performed, never satisfies the soul. Because your inner world knows when you are playing someone else's role. Eventually, you forgot how to hear yourself. Your intuition, once sharp like lightning, became faint. Decision-making became paralyzing. Every choice required validation from someone else. What's believed this paralysis is the death of the spirit, when you no longer trust your own experience. Without trust in yourself, you become a prisoner of advice, opinions, and expectations. You stop living and begin existing, mechanically, obediently, quietly. And yet, even in this numbness, life continues to send reminders. Moments of joy spark when you do something unscripted. Goosebumps rise when a forgotten passion resurfaces. Tears fall unexpectedly when a memory of who you were flickers in your mind. These moments are not random. They are messages. Watts would say they are evidence that your soul is still alive beneath the rubble of conditioning. It refuses to die quietly. So here you stand, between who you learn to be and who you truly are. Tired of pretending, exhausted by performance, yet afraid of shedding the mask. But take a breath. Watts reminds us that remembering is not becoming. You already are. You are simply peeling away everything you were taught to be, until only truth remains. And though the journey feels terrifying, it is the first genuine step toward coming home to yourself. From the moment you entered the world, expectations wrapped around you like invisible chains. Your worth was measured by grades, behavior, and obedience. You were praised for following the script, go to school, get the job, fit the mold. Alan Watts believed that society fears the unpredictable nature of a free mind, so it builds systems that reward conformity. And slowly, without questioning, you began carrying the weight of obligations that were never yours to hold. You learned to judge your value by how well you performed, not by how deeply you lived. As you grew older, these expectations evolved into silent contracts. Be agreeable, be responsible, be normal. Anytime you dared to step outside the lines, someone tugged you back, reminding you not to disrupt the order. That pull became so strong you eventually stopped trying. Watts would say that this is where most people die spiritually. Not when the heart stops beating, but when the soul stops dancing. And so you became smaller, quieter, a dimmed version of the brilliant force you once were. Compromises became habits. Your passions were labeled impractical, your emotions dramatic, your dreams unrealistic. Instead of defending the fire inside you, you learned to hide it. Society applauded your sacrifice, calling it maturity. But maturity without authenticity is simply decay. Watts believed that true adulthood is not about abandoning wonder. It's about navigating the world while keeping wonder alive. And slowly, an ache began forming beneath your ribs, whispering that something essential had been lost. Trying to be what everyone else needed left no room for who you needed to be. You said yes when you wanted to scream no. You apologized when others hurt you. You held space for everyone but yourself. Eventually, you woke up feeling tired for no reason. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the exhaustion of living a life someone else designed. What's would ask? Who are you living for? Because if the answer is everyone else, the cost is always your own joy. So you carry this weight, quietly, hoping one day someone will tell you it's okay to put it down. But that permission doesn't come from the world. It comes from within. Your soul is not asking you to be perfect. It's begging you to be real. And every moment you feel the heaviness, every sigh that escapes your chest, is proof that the mask has grown too tight. Change is not weakness. It is remembering who you were before expectations told you otherwise. Slowly, the disconnect grows. You start moving through life on autopilot, waking, working, smiling, sleeping, without ever truly feeling. You notice yourself laughing at jokes that don't touch you, nodding in conversations you're not present in, and agreeing with opinions that don't reflect your own. Alan Watts described this as the tragedy of self-forgetfulness, when the actor becomes lost in the role, forgetting it was ever a performance at all. And this disconnection is subtle. It doesn't strike suddenly. It creeps. Your reflection starts to feel unfamiliar. You recall dreams you once cherished, passions that once electrified your heart, but now they feel distant, like memories of a past life. Watts would say that this numbness is a signal, not a sentence. When you forget who you are, your soul withdraws into silence, waiting patiently for you to notice its absence. This is why the emptiness grows, not because you are broken, but because you have abandoned the path of truth. Relationships deepen the disconnection. You want to be seen, yet you hide. You crave understanding, yet you withhold your truth. People love the mask, not the person beneath it, and you fear that removing it will shatter the illusion. So you stay quiet, invisible in plain sight. Watts believed that love without authenticity is just performance, a lonely imitation of connection. And every time you choose safety over truth, you sink further from yourself. This disconnection affects more than emotion. It affects purpose. You begin questioning everything. Why am I here? What do I really want? Who am I beneath the layers? Watts taught that these questions are cracks in the armor of conditioning. They are not signs of weakness. They are awakenings, the soul banging on the prison doors. These questions terrify the false self because they are keys that unlock its undoing. Eventually, the internal divide becomes unbearable. The mask demands constant maintenance, draining your energy, stealing your peace. But deep beneath the exhaustion, something sacred still burns. It is the memory of who you once were, raw, curious, unapologetically alive. And though buried, it is not gone. Watts would insist that your true self cannot die. It waits, patiently, for your return. The disconnect you feel now is not the end. It is the beginning of remembering. Then something happens, quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. A phrase you read, a song lyric you hear, a simple conversation with a stranger, and suddenly, your soul stirs. You feel an inner whisper that says, there is more to you than this. Alan Watts believed that awakening doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives like a forgotten memory resurfacing. It is not the discovery of something new, but the remembrance of something ancient within you. And once that spark ignites, the mask you've worn for so long begins to feel suffocating. You start noticing the cracks, moments when the persona slips and your true voice emerges without apology. It surprises you at first. You may even apologize for it. But something about those moments feels more real than anything you've experienced in years. Watts taught that truth has a unique resonance. When you speak from the soul, your body relaxes, your breath deepens, and your spirit expands. After spending so long performing, the first glimpse of authenticity feels almost rebellious. This awakening brings discomfort. The environments you once tolerated now drain you. Conversations you once enjoyed feel hollow. People you once admired seem misaligned. It's not that everything changed, it's that you did. Watts would explain that awakening is a shift of perspective, not circumstance. You begin to see the invisible strings of expectation tied around your decisions. And suddenly, the idea of shrinking for approval becomes unbearable. Fear rises alongside clarity. You wonder, what if people don't like the real me? What if I lose relationships? What if everything falls apart? What's often emphasized that fear is simply resistance to the unknown. And yet, your soul craves honesty more than comfort. That inner longing grows louder, urging you to choose truth over belonging, freedom over acceptance. The moment of awakening is not peaceful. It is a rupture, a tear in the fabric of who you pretended to be. And once you've tasted the truth of who you are, returning to the mask becomes impossible. You may try, out of habit, guilt, or fear, but it will no longer fit. That discomfort is liberation disguised as pain. It's the universe saying, the costume served its purpose. Now, it's time to be who you were before the world taught you to forget. Your awakening marks the first step home, not to a place, but to yourself. Awakening breaks the illusion, but transformation requires unlearning. The beliefs that shaped you are deeply rooted, programmed by culture, family, religion, and fear. Alan Watts would say that true wisdom is not adding more knowledge, but removing the false assumptions we built our identity upon. To become who you truly are, you must first dismantle who the world taught you to be. This is not easy work. It often feels like tearing down a house you spent decades constructing. Unlearning begins with questioning. Why do you apologize for existing? Why do you feel guilty for resting? Why do you believe you must earn love? These questions cut deep because they challenge the foundations of your identity. But their answers are liberating. Watts believed that questioning is the first act of freedom. It exposes the invisible chains of expectation wrapped around your life. And with each answer, one link breaks. You will feel resistance, not just from the world, but from within. The mind clings to familiarity, even when it hurts. The ego panics when its illusion of control is threatened. You may hear internal voices whispering, stay small, stay safe, don't make them angry. But these voices are echoes of old conditioning, not your truth. The soul's voice is quieter, but steadier. It says grow, and in that whisper, you'll find your courage. Unlearning also reveals grief. You mourn the years spent pretending, the opportunities missed, the dreams abandoned. Watts would tell you not to judge your past self. They did what they had to survive. This grief is not weakness, it is healing. It honors the parts of you that carried pain, so the present you could carry wisdom. Through unlearning, you reclaim what was stolen, your voice, your passion, your power. And as these layers fall away, something remarkable happens. Space. Space for clarity, curiosity, creativity. You begin to breathe differently. You speak with intention. You make decisions based on desire, not fear. The world will call this selfish, but Watts called it sanity. For the first time, you are no longer living for approval. You are living for truth. And the courage to unlearn becomes the key that unlocks your becoming. As the layers of conditioning fall away, you begin to sense a version of yourself you haven't encountered in years, or perhaps ever. It feels lighter, clearer, more alive. This is not a new self, but the original you that existed before the world placed labels on your skin. Alan Watts described this rebirth as returning to the cosmic dance, where life is not a performance, but a play. Authenticity is not something you create. It is something you allow. And when you finally allow it, everything shifts. Your voice gains depth. Your eyes regain spark. Even your silence speaks differently. Authenticity does not arrive quietly. It disrupts the habits that kept you numb. It challenges relationships that depended on your compliance. Those who benefited from your silence may resist your truth. Watts would say this is inevitable. When you stop performing, you reveal the stage that others continue to stand on. Some will celebrate your return. Others will back away, uncomfortable with your honesty. But this, too, is part of rebirth, shedding what no longer resonates so you can rise without weight. You'll notice a strange phenomenon. As you grow more real, life grows simpler. Decisions become intuitive rather than agonizing. Opportunities appear that match your essence, not your excuses. Watts taught that when you align with your true self, the universe responds like a tuning fork, vibrating in resonance. You no longer chase outcomes. You attract experiences that reflect your honesty. Even challenges feel intentional, as if life is sculpting you with care rather than chaos. This rebirth also brings joy, not the loud, performative joy of pretending everything is fine, but the quiet joy of being without justification. Moments become richer. Colors look brighter. Time slows. You begin to taste the sacred in the ordinary, discovering that authenticity isn't about dramatic transformation. It's about presence. What's believed we miss life because we are always becoming someone else. But authenticity anchors you here, now, where the miracle truly lives. With authenticity comes a surprising peace. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop betraying yourself. You realize the greatest suffering was self-abandonment, and the greatest healing is self-return. This peace is not fragile. It cannot be taken by opinion, nor shaken by judgment. It is the quiet strength of someone who has finally remembered who they are and refuses to forget again. As authenticity settles into your bones, you begin to understand what freedom truly means. It's not about doing whatever you want. It's about no longer pretending to be what you are not. Alan Watts believed that liberation is the removal of illusion, the moment you stop living someone else's script. With each honest breath, you reclaim sovereignty over your life. You stop living to impress, achieve, or perform. You begin living to express. And in that shift, a lifetime of tension dissolves. The most powerful realization arrives quietly. The world you feared revealing your true self to was never paying attention. Everyone is lost in their own projections, insecurities, and masks. Watts would say we're all characters in each other's dreams. When you grasp this, judgment loses its sting. You no longer hesitate to speak your truth, to take up space, to choose differently. Fear evaporates because you see through the illusion that others' opinions define your worth. Authenticity deepens every aspect of life: relationships, work, creativity. Connections become soulful because you're no longer offering diluted pieces of yourself. Passion reignites because you're no longer suppressing desire. Purpose finally reveals itself because you stopped asking the world for permission. Watts taught that your purpose is not to become someone. It is to be fully yourself, and to let the universe shape around that truth. Yet, liberation does not mean perfection. You will still feel fear, doubt, and uncertainty. But now, you face them without abandoning yourself. You can be afraid and still honest. You can be imperfect and still worthy. This is mature freedom, not the absence of challenges, but the presence of self. And once you reach this point, the world changes not because it shifted, but because your perception did. And finally, you realize something profound. The journey was never about becoming good by society's standards. It was about becoming whole by your soul's standards. You were never meant to fit into the narrow definition of good. You were meant to expand life through authenticity, to love without pretending, to speak without shrinking, to exist without apology. In remembering who you are, you not only free yourself, you silently give others permission to remember, too. When we look back at the journey, we see how subtle the forgetting was, and how powerful the remembering became. Layer by layer, you were shaped into something predictable, manageable, good, and yet, beneath all the conditioning, a deeper truth never stopped breathing. Alan Watts would remind us that identity is not something granted by society, but uncovered by consciousness. What you called rebellion was simply your inner nature demanding to exist. Now, as you stand awakened, you realize that the greatest act of goodness is refusing to abandon yourself ever again. Every crack in a mask, every restless night, every moment of emptiness was never a sign of failure. It was the soul whispering, "You were not born to perform. You were born to experience, create, express, and expand." The discomfort you once feared was actually the doorway back to authenticity. And while the world may still ask you to shrink, you no longer owe your silence to anyone. The cost of pleasing others is far too expensive when it requires the sacrifice of your essence. Your return to truth changes more than your life. It changes your relationships, your choices, your voice. You will lose people who only love the version of you that kept them comfortable, but you will gain those who honor your depth. Watts taught that the universe responds to authenticity like an echo. Whatever you send outward returns amplified. When you speak from your soul, opportunities align, connections deepen, and clarity replaces chaos. That is the mystical reward of remembering who you are. So carry this awareness with grace. You no longer need permission to feel deeply, speak honestly, or dream wildly. You are not responsible for maintaining anyone's illusion. And if fear lingers, remind yourself, the cage may feel safe, but it was never home. Freedom is not loud. It is the quiet confidence of someone who looks inward and recognizes themselves. Let each day become an act of return, not to the performance, but to the presence of your truth. If this message reached a forgotten part of you, if it awakened memories, stirred emotions, or reminded you of the sacredness within, then stay connected with this community. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share in the comments which part spoke to your soul the most. Your voice may be exactly what someone else needs to remember who they are.